All right, so today I'm going to be covering more UVing, but it's going to be a little bit more advanced ways that you can get your UVs overlapping if necessary in the 0 to 1 space and outside of the 0 to 1 space. I'm going to cover how to explode a model in Painter, which we didn't get a chance to do the other day, as well as creating customized texture exporters. If you did not do that last month, breaking down what multi-maps are. I'm also going to talk about ID maps, which is a customized mask that you can make prior to going into Substance Painter. And then I'm just going to be covering some additional stuff in Painter as well. With your game res, you want to make sure that your edge normals have been hardened or softened correctly, which is something that you should have already done in the modeling phase, but I'm going to cover it again. I'm going to work on this pipe mesh. I already started UVing it just to save some time, but I have a game res with some bolts and some nuts that are on these bolts that go through the model. And I also have a high-res model for it, and I apologize, I'm starting to get sick, so if I'm coughing a lot, I'm sorry. There is a high-res version of it, which flipping back and forth from 1 to 3 is giving me the rounded edges that I want. You should be duplicating your high-res over and creating a smoothed version of it. So I have that one, but then I also have one that's in my export layer, and this is the one, the high-res, that I've smoothed and made sure that in 1 mode it looks good. Because in 3 mode, this only exists in Maya. When I bring this high-res into Painter, there's no 3 mode. It goes back to 1 mode. It's just a preview in here of what it will look like smooth. So when you're exporting your high-res to go into another program to bake, you need to do the actual smooth on it so that the geometry is there. At this point, my game res and high res are resting on top of each other, which doesn't really matter right now. I'm more concerned with finishing up the UVing for it. So I did UV this main piece already. Take a look at what this looks like in the 0 to 1 space, which I have not put it in the 0 to 1 space yet. I'm just kind of working right now. I'll duplicate this over so you guys can get an idea of what I did. So hardening and softening the edges is something that I still need to do on this. I wanted to wait just as review. So anywhere where you have bevels or rounded edges, you're going to want your model softened. That's the general rule when you're dealing with softening and hardening edges. If you have a 90-degree edge, if you need it to look sharp or if there's not a bevel, you want to do the harden. And also conserving geometry. Most of this stuff is round. I'm going to grab everything on this game res, shift right mouse, and you can do the soften harden and test it out with the slider. Down at 0 is going to harden all the edges. At 180, it's going to soften all the edges. And then you can kind of find a sweet spot. It really depends on the model. Or shift right mouse. I tend to soften everything first and then go through and find edges that I want to harden. So most of this has bevels already, so I would want this softened. But this crease back here and this crease right here, I'm kind of losing that definition. I'm also losing the definition on the front here. This edge and this edge, I want to harden. And then this right here, which I can't double click on, there's a couple different ways you can select this. I'm going to grab the face, command right mouse, and go to edges, and that'll grab all of the edges all the way around. Shift right mouse and harden those as well. So now I have that crease back, and the rest of this stuff should be okay. These are single edges. I have them soften. I'm getting a little bit of shading issue. This is somewhere where I would keep my eye on after I get my bake. Once your normal map is baked, double check if there are any areas like this and see if you have any permanent shading. If there is, and this kind of ties back to this type of thing, where if you have edges on your model that are 90 degrees that you soften, you end up with this shading issue, which bakes into the normal map. This doesn't always cause a problem. I'll keep my eye out on those areas once I bake to see if it's okay that I'm leaving those hardened. And pretty much everything else is going to be softened. When it comes to the UVing, what I've done so far is I've pretty much taken this main piece and run an auto map on it. And what I've ended up with is trying to get rid of the circular shells. Because remember, with the open circular shells, unless you have something that's going to fit inside of it, you don't want these. They take up a lot of space. These are all just rectangular pieces that are running up all of these parts of the model. So I grabbed each one and did a move and sew and a move and sew, and I sewed these together into big, long, rectangular strips. I left this one alone, and then I cut one of these and sewed that on as well. And that's how I ended up with what you're seeing here that I've already spent some time UVing. So I have this middle piece here that goes all the way back. You can see the shell. I have this piece, which is an open circular shell. But looking at this model, this piece on the model fits inside of this piece, which means this will eventually fit inside of this. I don't have to cut every single open circular shell if I have something that's going to go inside of it. I messed up the textile density on this just to cover layout again. And then this big shell is everything that's running along the back. Everything is over to the right-hand side when I'm happy with it. And then I'm going to start working on the next pieces, which are these bolts that are running through the model. I like to separate the mesh first and work one little piece at a time. I'm going to UV these pieces now, looking at them, trying to gauge kind of what type of map is going to work best for them. Please make sure you're using the checkerboard. If you've forgotten how to do it, grab your model, right mouse, and then you can add a new material. If you have favorites set up, you can use those as well, but sometimes the settings on these are not really what you want them, so to be safe, assign a new one. Lamberts don't have any specular highlight on. Go to wherever that Lambert is, and in the color is where you're going to assign that file texture and the checkerboard that I gave you. So on this piece, I will try an auto map and see how that goes. With auto mapping, it's going to, as long as there's no history or transforms, and let me delete history and freeze on this because I don't know what's going on with it. This is how it set it up. So with these types of pieces, I have straight edges, and this is the part that's going around here. Shift right mouse and move and sew. Shift right mouse and move and sew. And I'm sewing them based off of the straight sides, not based off of the angled bevels. Grabbing the angled bevels and moving and sewing is going to sew it crooked like this. So if you have straight edges, even if I then grab the bent edge as well, it's going to sew on more straight than if I just grab this. Now it's going to be better if I just grab this here and sew it, and then take this edge and shift right mouse and sew it. I might not even want to sew those together. I would need to double check and see if they're tapering. And then I have the cap here. With this type of auto mapping, I'm probably going to need to do some tweaking to it. Grabbing all of this and running an unfold is probably not going to work. And as I click it, it actually did work pretty well. But if you're noticing that this turns into a bent shape like a smile or a frown shape, undo. You do not want any of your cylindrical shells to be bent. Your cylindrical mesh shells should always be a straight rectangle. If you can't get it that way by doing an auto map and unfolding, you can try using unfold along. Unfold along in U unfolds left to right, V unfolds up and down, and most of the time you get a lot less damage to your shell if you use unfold along. Another option, if you cannot get it to work with auto mapping, is grab what you visually see as a cylinder. So this cap is not a cylinder, so I'm going to leave that alone, and take this whole shell and cylindrical map it. Cylindrical mapping maps up in Y. So this cylinder is not in Y. Click on the little T here, which is an edit. Grab the rotate. And with that rotate widget selected, you can, on one axis, start to rotate that gray cage around so it matches up with the model. If you have not rotated it a specific angle, like 90 degrees, and you don't know what angle you rotated it, just eyeball it. Looking at the shells, I can tell, because the shell becomes straight, where I need it to be. You can also go into your channel box and look. So this is pretty much going to be at a rotate of 90. And that got it laid out pretty nicely. Cylindrical mapping doesn't always get the checkers square, so this is something I can fix pretty easily by looking at the model and scaling until the checkers are square. Now these are tapered here, and I am getting a little bit of pulling. So if that is the case, grab the edge ring. So I'll take here and then double click, and it's going to grab that edge ring all the way around and do a cut. I'm not going to grab everything. I'm just going to grab the UVs up here at the top, and we can try and unfold. Or maybe we'll do just an unfold along U, which is side to side, or V, which is up and down, and then U. So that did a lot less damage. It does matter the order between V and U when you're doing unfold. If you don't like the way it works, undo and try doing it the opposite way. Sometimes doing U first works, sometimes doing V first works. It just depends. This did put a little bit of space in between because these faces are tapered on the model. That's going to give less wobbliness or stretching in those places. I might not want the seam on this where it's at. And I can see where the seam is because it has that white line. That you turn on by shift right mouse and texture borders. You want to make sure your texture borders are on. It makes it much easier to see where your seams are. Looking at this straight on, which is how I'm going to be looking at it, I don't know that I want the seam so visible right here. I might want the seam actually back here. If that's the case, grab the edge ring or edge loop and do a cut. Each one of these faces now is its own separate little shell. You can't sew something that's rectangular onto something that's circular, so it's good that each one of these is its own separate little face. And this ties back to the podcast on UVing circular shells and how to get them sewn on. This is where I want them all sewn. So I'll move and sew. It's going to take all those little pieces and sew them on. Unfortunately, they're overlapping. So this needs an unfold. And what that did was sew them back on and also allow them to kind of open up. They're wider here than here, but because it's round, there's enough space so that they're not overlapping. This looks pretty good. I'm going to take these and move them off to the side. This one in the back is also just a basic cylindrical map. So I'll do that. Grab the T to edit, grab the rotate widget, and rotate. I'm just going to type 90 in, because I'm pretty sure that's the right angle. And this definitely needs to be scaled a bit. Stop when the checkers are square. This is not something that layout fixes. The only thing that fixes rectangular checkers is you either manually scaling shells, using unfold, using the smooth tool. Those are the tools that stop this from happening. Having these square means that the faces in your shells match the shape and size of the faces on your model, which then ensures that whatever texture is on here is going to be looking how you want it to look. This is also technically a cylinder. Let's try with auto mapping first. I like doing auto mapping, and then I'll unfold or smooth, double check that the checkers are square. And this upper section right here, this you want to do over and over and over again on every piece until it's totally UV'd. After it's totally UV'd, then combine the meshes back together and then work on layout. On this one, it laid out pretty nicely, but if you're looking at this face and this face are the same size on the model, but auto mapping didn't create them the same size. That's the reason that this is stretching. I can try to unfold it. I would like to sew them all together first, so I'm shift right mousing and moving and sewing. So now this is one big shell, and it's a lot easier to see now how uneven this is. Grab the UVs and maybe unfold. So this unfolded quite nicely. It didn't bend upwards or bend downwards at all. It just kind of relaxed itself out. I can also unfold along U, which is doing exactly the same thing as what the regular unfold is, which doesn't always happen. Now unfolding along V for some reason is crimping this in here, even though the model is not crimped in. So I don't want to unfold along V first. We'll do U, and then we'll do V. I do like that this sewed on here. I don't like, though, that it's stretching because these are tapered. So it's easier for me to select the edge ring out here than it is to select it in here. Do a cut, grab all of the UVs, and do an unfold. That opened them up and made them closer to the shape on the model, which got rid of that pulling. I don't usually spend any time rotating these shells the correct direction yet. I save that step until almost the very end, because when you run layout, because of the way the tool works and the bugs with the tool, it usually will rotate your shells. So don't spend any time rotating them the correct orientation. You're probably going to have to rotate them again. So we'll move this out of the 0 to 1 space. And what I have at this point is this chunk UV'd. The textile density is off. Let me double check where my seams are. Remember to move the seams. It's pretty simple to do. So the seam on this is out here, which I probably would prefer it to be somewhere inside here where it's less noticeable. So where you have a seam, find where you would rather have it and do a cut, which puts a seam there. And then find where you'd rather not have the seam and move and sew it back together. You want to do this stuff before you run layout and get everything in the 0 to 1. This mesh's seam is already on the inside back here. My seam is already pretty much in a spot where I'm not going to see it, but if I wanted to move it, do a cut, then take where the seam was and move and sew it. And you're just shifting where that cut is. These pieces have been duplicated. When I created this, I put the pivot in the center and I duplicated and then I rotated it and then duplicated it and then rotated it based off a pivot in the middle. One of the things that we talked about in breakdown sheets is you don't want to model something more than once. If it's there 4 times, model it once and then duplicate it. The problem with doing that and getting everything placed is that then you have a bunch of the same model that's not UV'd. I could take this whole chunk right here, put it in a group, and then duplicate it. Because when you duplicate something that's UV'd, it stays UV'd. And I could move this and use these as placeholders and duplicate around and then delete the ones that don't have the UVs. And I could end up with this whole thing UV'd. There is another option. It's called transfer attributes. Transfer attributes is a tool that allows you to copy and paste UVs from one mesh to another. The meshes have to be identical. If there's one edge that's off, or the vert order is off, or you added a bevel on one and didn't on the other, it's not going to recognize that those meshes are the same. If you try to use transfer attributes and it doesn't work, then your best bet is to take the mesh and just duplicate it. The order of operations on this is going to depend, and this is something that you should be planning out prior to finishing UVing, and I'm going to show you guys both ways to do this. If you are okay with all 6 of these having the exact same texture on them, then wait and do not run transfer attributes yet. If you want all of these to have its own unique original texture and you can paint on every single one of those, then you want to run this transfer attributes now before you do your layout. So I'll do it both ways. Let's say I want this one to be unique and I want to be able to paint on this in Substance Painter and texture it however I want to texture it. Same thing with this one. I want this one to also be unique and I can paint whatever I want on this one. In that case, I would want to run the transfer attributes right now. Grab the one that's UV'd. So this, even though it's not in the right place yet, it's still kind of floating out in space. Shift select the one that's not UV'd. Under Mesh, Transfer Attributes, I'll reset my settings and sample space goes to component. When I hit apply, what it's going to do, and notice that this darkened, it took the exact UVs from this one and duplicated it to this one. Same thing on these back pieces. I'll grab this one, shift select the one that's not UV'd, and you can hit apply or hit G. G on the keyboard is going to do the last thing that you just did. So now these are identical. These are not in 0 to 1 yet. I'm still going to need to run my layout. So when I run the layout, both of them are going to have their own unique space. And that means when I bring them into Painter, I'll be able to paint on each one of them separately. These I'm going to have all share the exact same texture as this one. So I'm not going to run the transfer attributes yet. I'm going to wait until everything is in its final resting place, and then I'll run it. I'll skip over those for now. And at this point, I am pretty much right here. My seam placement is good. My checkers are square. I have the things laid out that I need that are unique. The duplicates you want to wait on. Layout to correct textile density issues. I'll grab everything, delete and freeze. I'm also going to save. Make sure you're saving incrementally with 1, 2, 3, 4 or A, B, C, D. You do not want to save over the same file and then end up having that file corrupted. So with layout, you can access it down here in the Arrange and Layout tab, or it's under Modify, Layout. I'm going to go to the options for it, which Shift and left mouse. It'll open up options for whatever the tool is that you're using and reset my settings. I know by default it goes to the Unfold 3D, and sometimes this works. I don't trust this tool. I've been using the Legacy for years, and I would much rather use the Legacy because I know it works. It's up to you what you want to use. Legacy, if you just run it as is, what happens is that everything is going to go into the 0 to 1 space. And this didn't because of something else, which I'll explain in a second. It doesn't adjust for textile density because at Legacy reset to default, it's not allowed to scale anything. So if my UVs are scaled off, it doesn't care. It's just moving it into the 0 to 1. Now the reason why this didn't move everything into the 0 to 1 space is because when you use this transfer attributes, history is between the parent and child of whatever you did that transfer attributes for. And I could have sworn that I deleted history, but it did not delete the history and connection between these because these ended up not going into the 0 to 1 space. So I'm just going to double check and make sure everything has been deleted and frozen, and then run my layout. Hitting apply, now everything went into the 0 to 1 because I don't have that history on there anymore. But what it did not do is fix my textile density. To fix textile density, your Legacy layout needs to be set to object. It's then allowed to look at the object and say, okay, this is how long the shell should be in correlation with how large that part of the model is. And this is way more like what it should look. This is a really large piece of my model. And you can see just by looking at it now that all the checkers are the same size. This is not by any means a optimized layout. This shell is stopping all of these other shells from being able to be scaled up. And I definitely don't want that to happen. I'm not going to bother rotating anything yet because I'm probably going to have to run layout a couple more times. What I do want is to figure out a way to fit this stuff in here better. And the best way to do it is by cutting this in half. So I'm going to find around 0.5. Over here on the side, you'll have grid units to show where halfway down is. I don't have an edge right halfway, so I'll just pick one that's close and cut. Once that's cut, I'm going to Command L, or you can just click on Layout again. Command L runs the Layout tool, but you have to be in object mode. And your mouse also has to be in here. So with Command L, I ran Layout again. Everything scaled up a bit larger because now this shell is cut in half. This eventually is going to go in here. Maya's not great at figuring out where to put these. It fixes textile density, it is non-overlapping, and it gets it into the 0 to 1. But the manipulation of the puzzle pieces is really up to you. I know that this is going to fit in here. And by me doing this, even though it doesn't quite fit, it's way more optimized for me to scale this down a little bit and scale this up a little bit so that it fits than it would be for those two to not be resting within each other. This is a cleaner, more optimized way for these shells to be. I'm going to double check and just make sure that they're not overlapping. I might even scale that down just a tiny bit more. That is not going to be a noticeable textile density change. If I am doing this, then yes, I can see there's a textile density issue. With that done, I can fit, and I'm going to grab these shells because these are all little tiny ones that I can really fit in wherever. I'm going to move these out. I'm not scaling anything, I'm just moving right now. This and this can come back in here, and I have one full grid unit of space now available in U, and I have 1.5 grid units of space available in V, which means I can scale this up again. I don't want to run layout again because these two are going to separate, and I don't really need to run layout again. I just want to scale everything. When you do it, scale everything. These are the main pieces, which is why I'm really spending time on these two, or actually these four. Scale it up a little bit bigger. And I'm trying to get as close as I can to filling the width of this. And at this point, I really can't scale this up anymore because I'm at my max width-wise. I'm not at my max height-wise, but that doesn't really matter. I can't do anything else with this. Now these I can bring back in. I do, at this point, now want to start dealing with the rotations. So you can rotate it by hand. You can hold down J. J will allow you to rotate these shells by a 15% snap. So you can see that it's snapping 15 degrees. Or if you want to use the rotate under transform here, and notice when I hit J, it's turning that 15 degree snap on. You can type in 90 here. You can type in whatever you want. I'm going to just use this because it's faster. And then grab this. Let me try to use Y on that, see if that works. No, it doesn't. So let's rotate this. And you don't want to do this until you're pretty sure you're not running layout again. And I'm pretty sure I'm not running layout again because I got everything in this space. All of these are rotated off. If it's easier for you to isolate when you're doing this, do it. I'm going to isolate because it might be easier for me to see. So this face right here, not 100% sure what direction that needs to go in because it's offset. So that should be that direction. And then just pick, when you're dealing with these types of shells, which way you want. You want it to run forward, you want it to run backwards, but whatever you choose, make sure you're doing it on all of the shells. So I'm going to have all of these shells with the numbers running backwards, away from the model. Same thing on this. And this is time consuming and kind of a pain to do, but it's something that you need to do and it will save you time when you're in Painter to not have to be doing a bunch of masks and figuring out how all of that stuff needs to go. So these are all rotated up and down. These are all rotated backwards. I'm good to go on those. And I'm going to do the same exact thing for these. Now, with these, because I've already rotated them, and these I already copy and pasted, I could technically run that transfer attributes again and have it copy paste so that I don't have to rotate these shells. That's fine to do as well. From here to here, run the transfer attributes. And this one that's curved and angled the different direction will mimic exactly what's going on there. They're going to be on top of each other, but I can very easily just move the two shells off. So it depends on really what you feel like doing. This one, maybe I'll just rotate by hand. This gets rotated around since I have the rotate tool right here. This I don't have to rotate. This one I do have to rotate. And if I really felt like it, and I'll do it on that back one. So the red one is a 9, so that needs to go that way. So here's an issue. This piece, when I'm rotating it, I can't get the shell to rotate based off of the 45 degrees. It's not going to go straight up and down. This is where you would want to take that shell and hold down the J key, because that's going to give you a 15% snap, which is less than 45 and allow you more freedom when you're rotating. If that doesn't work, you may need to manually rotate it. So on this one, let's grab the one that's good, shift select, mesh, transfer attributes. Now they're on top of each other, which can't happen. You cannot have overlapping UVs when you're baking. So I just moved them side to side, and that saved a little bit of time. So with all of this now, this last little clump of stuff needs to get in the 0 to 1 somehow. And I'm going to just manually move it. There's no reason to run another layout. I do want to try to keep these shells near each other. So these two should be together. And you can just mouse over to find where the shells are. So here's another one. And then this front face is here. And then lastly, this one in the back is here. And then this last stuff can go over here. This is going to just help you when it comes time to texture, that you know where this stuff is. And honestly, scaling these up just a very little tiny bit to use more of the space is not going to be noticeable texel density wise. Just make sure that you're not scaling anything up like crazy large or crazy small. They also should not be overlapping. This is utilizing the space with the meshes that we want to be unique. What I need to do now is figure out where these are going to go. I usually use a ceiling fan as an example for this. If you think about UVing that, the top of each fan blade would be a shell, and the bottom of each fan blade would be a shell. That's a lot of space taken up for one blade. There's 5 blades, which means you're going to have 10 shells for the top and the bottom, which is going to take up a significant amount of your 0 to 1 space if you don't need to paint them all uniquely. If all the fan blades are going to have wood grain on them, then put one in the 0 to 1 space. The rest of them don't need to be in there. So these 4, I don't really care. Let's just have them all be based off of this main one here. Grab one, shift select, mesh, transfer attributes. And if you're fine with them being identical, you do this after everything is already in its final resting place. Let's take this one, and it doesn't matter which one you're selecting. You can grab the main parent, or you can grab then from child to child. As long as it's UV'd, it doesn't matter. And I'm just hitting G on the keyboard, and it's doing the same thing. Notice that all 5 of these now have the exact same checkerboard on them because they are now all sitting right on top of each other. Next one, let's grab this. Shift select here and G, shift select here and G, and all the way around. This, you guys are going to notice something a little bit different. I'm going to delete history and freeze, and let's move these out of the way. These did not all go in the same direction. The reason that happened is when I rotated as I duplicated them, which means that the vert order of them is in a different spot. These 2 verts are numbered. Every vert is numbered. Let's say this is number 11 and this is number 12. Because of the way I duplicated this, the 11 and 12 are now over here. This is not necessarily a bad thing, because if I paint something where this 12 is, it's not going to be in the same spot on all of these, which is going to make it seem as if they all have unique space. Even though I can't paint on them uniquely, there's some slight variation. So these pieces, let me undo back, and you'll be able to see this when I get into Painter, that these are all going to be identical because the 7s are all in the same spot. These are not. Let's grab this one, shift select this back one, and I'll transfer it once, and then we'll do the same thing all the way around, and then we'll go in Painter so that you can see what the effect of all of this is. Everything is UV'd now at this point. Grab everything, delete history, freeze transforms. Let me double check my UVs that things didn't blow up, which they did not. This is not okay. I cannot have overlapping UVs when I am baking. One last thing I did not do before I even get into that is I did not cut for my hard edges. This is something that has to be done, or else you're going to get the little black artifacting. When you have hard edges on a game res, if the shells are sewn together, you're going to get this, whether you're in Maya or in Painter. If you have a hard edge on your model, you have to have padding in between those shells. So before I even worry about moving stuff out of 0 to 1, I want to cut these. I laid out to correct textile density issues. I rotated all my shells so that they're readable. I got everything fit in the best I can. Cut for my hard edges. This works best if your mesh is combined. When you do this select using constraints, even if you have multiple meshes, it's only going to do it on one mesh. I'm going to combine everything together now. Select using constraints, go into edge mode, all in next, hard edges, close and reset. This is selecting for me all of my hard edges on my model. This is fine, this is fine. Everything up here is fine. These are all cut. This is fine. This is not. This is not. So these need to be cut. And I don't even bother deselecting. I just cut with everything selected, because if it's already cut, it stays cut. These I need to find some space for. This needs to be scaled up a bit. and make sure you're not overlapping, and this needs to get scaled down a bit. So now all of my hard edges have their shell splits. You do not want to do this before you've run layout, because if I run layout now, all of these pieces are going to be flying all over the place and not be nice and contained how they are. This is not going to work for me because of overlapping UVs. Anything that is overlapping is going to ruin the normal map. Textures are flat. If you're writing 5 different things in the same space, every time you rewrite, it's going to screw up the normal map. Programs also cannot write unique textures outside the 0 to 1 space. So that is a safe place to put these shells. This used to be a script that we had to do, but now is just keys on the keyboard. This and this are unique. So these two I know I want to leave alone. It's these that I want to get out of here. So I'm going to grab all of this and shift select this. I'm in shell mode, so let me go into object mode. And actually, let's mesh separate, because this is going to be a lot easier to do. I don't want any of that stuff. These are all the duplicates that are sitting over top of these. If you grab the UVs and hit the arrow key on the keyboard, it's going to do something called poly edit UV. And if I hit left, notice that nothing changed on these. It's going to move these all exactly over left 1 quadrant. Remember with textures in here, no matter where it is, everything is the same. In here, in here, in here, in here, no matter where it is, this texture repeats infinitely in this space. And notice that when I did that move, these did not change at all. I can take this one, and let's take both of those shells, and let's move those up. And by me hitting the arrow key, I know they are going into the exact same spot, but in a different quadrant. Let's take this one and move this one down and over. It doesn't matter if they're overlapping out of the 0 to 1. It doesn't matter where they are. You can arrow them way out into space. I don't know why you would, but you could. This is fine. This is going to bake fine. This is going to texture fine. Let's take this one and move this one over here. So nothing is overlapping in the 0 to 1, which is what's important. All of the duplicates have been moved over to exactly the same spot in a different quadrant. This is how we get around duplicating our UV shells over and still being able to bake. Delete history, freeze transforms. I'm going to mesh combine this together again because I'm ready to go into Painter. You guys may not need to do this. You know, if you want every single one of these bolts to have a unique texture on it, you do the transfer attributes and then run layout, and then they'll all just be in their own space in the 0 to 1. But if you're okay with them having the same texture, then do it this way. Once everything is done, high-res and game-res mesh have to be sitting on top of each other. If they are not, it's not going to bake. Same way as it won't bake in transfer maps. With exporting, the settings are here if you need to read over them. Make sure that your game-res has smoothing groups on and triangulate on. When you are working with the high-res, the triangulate should be off, unless you're dealing with a mesh that's been decimated from ZBrush. So with the game res selected, I'm going to export SM for static mesh. Pipes, I want smoothing groups and triangulate on. This warning is going to pop up. Just ignore it. Turn the export on. Let's grab one that's smooth, the export, that has all of the pieces in the right spots. Everything is nice and rounded. This is what I want to get my high-res bake from. Export this out. Doesn't matter what you name this. And turn triangulate off. This is already quadded, so I'm going to leave it quadded. If there are n-gons on here or triangles, it's fine. I'm just going to leave it off. So in Painter, File New, grab the game res, UDIM off, camera off. Document resolution, whatever you want at this point. When you export, I don't want you going more than 2K, but you can paint whatever size you want to paint. DirectX, even though we're on max, you want to make sure it's DirectX. Compute tangent space needs to be on. Make sure that is on. This is going to come in. It's going to look normal. I have a Lambert 2 on here because I didn't change the name of it. Everything looks good. Let's take a look at our 2D and 3D, because what you're going to see is all of those shells floating out in space, just like they were in Maya. And they'll be like this in Unreal as well, and it's fine that they're like this. Let's go to 3D. And normally you want to bake first, but just so I can show you what I did and what the effect of that is, let's just paint red in the upper left-hand corner. That red is going to go in the same exact spot on all of these because they are overlapping, not in the 0 to 1, but they are overlapping wherever they happen to be in that space. I cannot paint on this or on this. I can't paint on this because these are not in the 0 to 1. You can only paint on the shells that are in the 0 to 1 space. So if you know you want to paint on all of your pieces separately, don't do this. You're going to be stuck just painting on the 1. Let's paint blue because this is going to be a little bit different. If I paint up here, because of the way that the vert numbers are, when I made those UVs, this is going to be on that side, and then it's going to be down underneath, and then it's going to be over here, and then it's going to be here. This may be a good thing. That way when I'm painting damage, it's not going to be on the same spot on all of the meshes. If you don't want that to happen in Maya, you're going to have to rotate all the shells so they're identical. If I paint here, it's going to be in a different spot on all of these in the back. I cannot paint on this. I can paint on this one because this one also has its own unique space. This one has its own unique space, but these are unpaintable. They will end up with a normal map on it and a base color and a roughness, but they're going to be from this one because that is the one that I copied them from. I'm going to jump right into exploding a model just so I can show you this stuff before I start working on texturing this. This is the set of cubes that I showed you guys a couple weeks ago as to how to explode a model in Maya. So we have the game res, we have the high res, and when I baked this, remember there were issues happening down here, there were issues happening here, and also underneath, pretty much everywhere where pieces were intersecting. Exploding a model is pretty easy to do when you're in Maya because all you have to do is grab the meshes, mesh separate, and move them away from each other. In Painter, you can't move meshes. Painter uses naming conventions for it, and this can become a pain if you're dealing with a lot of meshes. I would recommend testing it first, and if you don't need to blow up your model, then don't do it. I'm going to test it first. We'll take the game res, export it out, SM_cubes. Game res gets smoothing groups and triangulate. High res is smoothed already. This is not just a 1 in 3. It's actually been smoothed. It's sitting right on top of the game res, and turn off triangulate and bring it in here and do a test. File new, game res. Let's bake. I'm not going to change any of the settings. I'm going to try it out just as is first and see how it works. So I'll do 1024, and let's grab those high res cubes. I'm getting these lines along the edges, and this is because my game res and high res just are not close enough together. Painter only allots for 0.01 threshold difference, which is hardly anything, and my high res is rounded and my game res just has a bevel on it, so they're not close enough to hit. This is where you would need to up your max frontal and rear distance. I'm going to turn off the ID map because we're not baking anything for that. So doing that fixed the edges. I opened that threshold up a little bit more and it was able to see the high-end game res. But we have this problem now. This is a problem that the bake is never going to fix. This is because my game res model has a sharp corner to it from being beveled, but my high res is round here. So this, there's no way around. I would have to go back into Maya and add a segment to that bevel to round this out so that the normal map and all of the maps on here make sense, because that's actually the normal map that's casting back there. Ambient occlusion is also casting back there, but I'm more concerned with the normal map because ambients are grayscale. You can always take ambients into Photoshop and tweak them if you need to. But this isn't going to work. even with the max frontal and rear distance down at 0.01, I was still getting issues in this area. I'm not really concerned with the ambient. Unfortunately, the way to fix this is by naming your high-res meshes with an _high and your game res meshes with an _low. I do a mesh separate, and thankfully I only have 6 pieces. This is my game res, so let's do top _low. Let's do top _high. So both of these are named top, and it's going to see that, and one is _low, one is _high. So it knows that those two get baked together. This is mid _high, and then let's grab the other one, and this will be mid. It doesn't matter what you name them, just as long as they're the same. _low, and if you want to do this in the outliner, it might be easier. Bottom _high, bottom _low. I can't combine these back together, because then they lose their naming conventions. So what I do want is to grab all 3 of my game res meshes that are all named and export. I'm going to override what I already saved them as and take all of the high res that are all named and export these. I will also override the high res. Don't do this if you don't have to. Start new, bring in the new game res that's now just separate pieces. No UDIM, no cameras, yes on compute tangent space. It's going to come in and look exactly the same. And let's bake. High res, let's do 1024. If I bake right now, it's going to bake exactly the same. Because by default, even if I up these, match is set to always. That means it's going to just use the high res and game res based off of location. This needs to be changed to by mesh name for it to look for the _high and _low. It's going to find those individual meshes. It's going to bake each one separately, and then it's going to combine all of those maps back together. I'm going to turn off the ambient occlusion for the cast back so that you can see now my normal map doesn't have that problem. My curvature map doesn't have that problem. My thickness map still does have this, but thickness is not going with us into Unreal, so it doesn't matter. The normal map doesn't have any issues. The world space normal doesn't have any issues. I can up these as high as I want to up these now, and I'm never going to have any cast back from any of these maps other than my ambient. And the ambient occlusion is always going to cast back. It gives you that shadow. So you know, ambient occlusions are grayscale textures. After I'm done with my base color and I'm totally done texturing, I can bring this ambient into Photoshop and clone stamp out all of these shadows. You need an ambient occlusion. There is not really a way to fix this. I would not worry about it if it is only happening in the ambient, and it's very easy to test that out by just turning it off. If there's no problems with the normal or with the curvature, then you're good. Please double check and make sure you only have one texture set. You're not allotted more than one texture for your asset. So if there is more than one texture set here, you have to go back in Maya and assign one shader to the whole game res. Then bring it back in here. If this menu is not open, it's under Window, Views, Texture Set List. This is fine. It's not named correctly. I'll name it in a minute. Let's bake first. I know I don't have ID map. I'm going to go up to a 1024. Let's grab the high res. And I'm going to leave it as is, so I'll get a decent enough bake with this. I could up, which I might do. Let's bake one more time. I'm going to up the anti-aliasing to 2x2 because that will help blur out any pixelation I see between the models. Once you're happy with the bake, start texturing. You guys need to use at least 2 or 3 different materials. You should not just be slapping one material on here. Please do not use smart materials. Find some rust. Let's do regular rust. Let's do some rust fine. And then let's do some steel. rust, wear, and tear. I'm going to get rid of the layer 1. There's nothing on there. And let's start with just this main rusty texture. When you first put a material up here, what you want to check is your UV projection. Make sure you don't have any noticeable seams, because remember with UV projection, if you have seams on your model, it's going to create seams on your material and on your mesh. Setting your projection to triplanar is going to allow the texture to flow along the model rather than along the flattened UV shells. Let's see if there's anything going on down here. So there's color, metal, roughness, and height that goes along with this particular material, but we don't have anything really to change. All it's giving me is a roughness slider where I can make this really glossy rust or matte rust. I can't change anything else unless I right mouse click and I create a fill layer or a generator or painting or filters. All of those things are open for you guys to work on. Q to get rid of that triplanar projection out there if you don't want it visible. Next, we have the rust fine. Now remember that the normal map and height map is going to be additive. So if you do not want to see the normal map from this layer underneath or the height map from underneath, you need to make sure to set your normal map layer to a normal layer and your height layer from a linear dodge, which is additive, to a normal layer. That is going to ensure that you are only seeing this layer when it comes to base color, normal, roughness, metal, etc. Normal maps and height maps are the only two that are additive and compound through all your layers. This rust fine also really doesn't have anything to change. Let's put a black mask on this rust fine texture, which is going to hide it. And I am going to paint white. So X flips back and forth between black and white, and I'm painting a mask right now. So let me find I don't know, whatever this brush is. And I'm going to start painting, and this flow is really low, so I'm going to up the flow on this. And pretty much what I'm doing is just painting a mask that's allowing more of this rust fine texture to show up. And this is really what I mean with blending the materials together. They can be two rust materials or two concrete materials or whatever. I don't care what they are. Just work on masks. Notice that I can't paint on this because this is one of those duplicates. As soon as I start painting here, though, it's going to happen on all of these. And I'm going to use a totally different texture for that. So blend some stuff together. Let's turn this steel rust on. Now this is a flat texture. This is getting the normal maps, and they're actually getting the height maps because there's no normal maps on either of these. So it's getting the heights from both of these here. If you don't want to see that, normal map for this layer on the very top gets set to a normal. The height gets set to a normal. Bless you. Now I am not seeing anything underneath it. Right mouse, add a black mask. And let's say I want these screws here, or these bolts, to have that texture on it. I don't feel like sitting here and painting them all. I would much rather just use that polygon fill. So remember, we have this tool over here. It's a square, triangulated, with a little arrow. This is going to allow me to grab per mesh. So if I grab that mesh, it's going to grab all of those meshes because they're all overlapping. This is going to grab all of those. And then I can grab this one and this one. If I come out of this tool and go back to my paintbrush again, I have very quickly created a mask for all of those bolts, and it's going to apply to all of the ones that are out of the 0 to 1 space as well. And then maybe let's do something ridiculous on here. Let's do copper. I'm going to throw some copper pure up here at the top. Now notice that this is getting all of these again, all of the normal maps from underneath. I only adjusted this one to not see these normal maps. I didn't adjust this one. So you can see where it's stopping, wherever that was set up. I would have to do the same thing on here. Normal map is going to go to normal. Height map is going to go to normal. Now, this didn't change anything because look at this copper. This copper doesn't even have a normal map or height map. So there is nothing to block these from being additive. Having those set to normal layers, I can turn these on and it's going to stop those from coming through because I have just made a blank height map and a blank normal map. It doesn't work if there's no texture there at all. And let's right mouse and black mask, and let's just set these there and there, just for example purposes. So we got that stuff done. I would like if you guys are also creating some sort of height information on your own. So unfortunately for this copper, there's nothing to adjust on it. Let's set it to triplanar, even though that doesn't really matter. Let's check this steel. So this does have some advanced parameters. Let's add some dirt. And this is adding it to this one right here. Let's do some surface imperfections so you can start to see some normal map and height coming. Maybe let's add some rust to it. And I'll do one final hand-painted layer up here, and let's just add our own height. So we'll turn all of these off. Remember, with hand-painted layers, you can paint all or just one. Let's go down to depth, and in the brushes, I'll do some cracks. So this is painting indented cracks. And let's do one big crack there. And then let's go, you don't have to go all the way up either. If you don't want it to be as intense, just go somewhere in gray. And now these are going to be sticking out. Notice I can't paint on that. I have to paint on this one. And I'll have some cracks sticking out on there. So let's say we're done with this. Make sure you're saving as you go. Just save this as whatever. Next stage is getting our textures exported. It has all the settings in here for you for importing, exploding if you need to do this. There's also a tutorial on FSO in the required viewing. Allegorithmic has its own tutorial on it. If you want to export with the default setup, I'm fine with you doing that. File, export textures. I have Lambert 2. It's kicking out a base color, metal, roughness, 2 different normal maps, a height map, which we don't need, and our ambient occlusion. If you go to the document channels, plus normal map, plus ambient, what you are going to end up getting is every single one of these textures. Let's export out as a targa. I'm going to throw them on the desktop, and this is what we did the other day. There's 2 normals. Remember, one of the normals isn't going to have much information. The other normal map is going to have your bake. It's going to have any normal and height from your materials, and it's going to have any height that you painted. Obviously, that's the normal map. We don't want that one. So that one can get thrown out. There's also a height map, which we do not need. The height map is already in this DirectX normal map. So both of those can go. I have base color, metal, normal map, ambient occlusion, and roughness. These are what you need to bring in Unreal with the GameRes mesh. If you want to be more optimized and use a multi-map, which is known as a packed texture, I'm going to go over how to do that. There's a bunch of different terms for this technique, and there's multiple reasons to use this technique. One of the main reasons is to reduce your texture footprint. When grayscale textures are used, they end up being more costly than using a colored texture. In Photoshop, I have my pillar bakes from last week. So I have my pillar base color that had the moss and the stone and some of the metal on here. If we look at this texture, it is an RGB, which if we go to modes, it's an RGB texture that has 8 bits per channel. This is the default when you're dealing with a colored texture. We have a red channel, we have a green channel, and we have a blue channel, which are all grayscale, but combined together give us the colors we need for this texture. If I save this out, this is going to be 3 megs. It's actually 3.3 megs. So if I go to my image size here, when I save this out, it's 3 megs. It's 1 meg per channel. 1 for the red, 1 for the green, 1 for the blue. When it saves out, it's 3.3, so they're technically 1.1. If I bring this into Unreal, so when you mouse over it, you can see it's a 1024 by 1024 texture. If I double click on it, it compresses to a default setting. It compressed down from 3 megs to about half of a meg. If we take our normal map, our normal map is also going to be 3 megs when we save it out. There is an RGB 8-bit per channel. We have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. When this is saved out, it's 3 megs. When we bring this in to Unreal, this is going to compress a little bit differently because it's a normal map, and it knows it's a normal map, so it automatically compresses it how it needs to be. Anytime there's a little yellow arrow here, it means it's been changed from default. It knows to compress it as a normal map. This is a little bit more expensive. This is double the size of my base color. My base color is 600. This is 1300, so it's a little over a meg. It's still less than the 3 megs that it was when it was saved on the desktop, so it is still getting compressed. Because this particular texture is viewed as individual channels for the red, the green, and the blue, it needs to get compressed differently. If I take one of my grayscale textures, so let's look at roughness, for example. Roughness and metal and ambient that kick out of Substance Painter with this default setup get kicked out individually as what's called an index file. Because they're grayscale, Painter tries to reduce the cost of them by only giving it one channel rather than a red, a green, and the blue with the same thing in each channel. The texture size for them, they're only 1 meg because there's only one channel. If I save this roughness out and take a look at it, it's going to be 1.1 megs because we're only dealing with one channel. The problem with these is when you bring grayscale textures into Unreal, they compress as something called a grayscale compression setting. And notice that this one grayscale texture is the same cost as my normal map, even though it's only one channel of information. Whereas my base color is 3 different channels of information at only half of a meg. I can take this roughness texture and manually change it from a grayscale to a default, and it will drop down to the same size as my base color. This is still not optimized because I'm getting 3 grayscale textures in here that are totally different, and I'm getting 1 grayscale texture that still costs the same. Your best bet when dealing with grayscale textures is to set up a multi-map. And a multi-map is you put one of your grayscale textures into the red channel, then one of your grayscale textures into the green, and one into the blue. And for the cost of half of a meg, you're bringing 3 textures in where you have an ambient or a height map or a mask or anything that's grayscale. You should be packing them into a multi-map. You will never need to do this by hand. I'm going to do it by hand in Photoshop so that you can see what happens when we create this customized exporter in Painter. I'm going to use these textures that we already have. So I have an ambient that's grayscale. I have a roughness that's grayscale. And I have a metal map that's grayscale. This is a perfect scenario for a multi-map. Create a new texture, which again, you're not doing. I'm just doing it to show you. And in the red channel, I'm going to paste one of my grayscale textures. I like to use ARM. So A for ambient, R for roughness, M for metal. ARM is easy to remember. Do you need to know what texture is in each channel? Because you're going to need to pull those when you're creating your material. I'll take my ambient, Command A, Command C, throw this into, not the layer, but into the red channel. Next, in ARM would be roughness, Command A, Command C. This goes in the green channel. And if you don't have a metal map, it's still cheaper to just plug something into the red and into the green channel and leave the blue channel empty. Command A, Command C. If you ever see textures that look crazy colors like this, it's because I am utilizing these as totally separate entities, but when Photoshop views them together, it tries to blend them all together. This is 3 megs. It is an RGB 8-bit per channel. We save this out, T underscore pillar underscore ARM, ambient roughness metal. Importing in a multi-map. double clicking it. It is half of a meg, but I have all three of these textures in, where for half of a meg, I was just getting the roughness. And that's if I change it from the compression setting that it comes in by default. The only thing that you need to do when you are bringing in multi-maps is uncheck this gamma correct so that it doesn't damage your grayscale textures. To use this in a material, so grab my texture sample, let's find my multi-map, and take this and plug it in. Or take this and plug it in here, or this. These need to be plugged in per channel. And if it's easier for you to type it in here or in the description so that you remember what it is, the red channel is where the ambient is. This goes to roughness. This goes to metal. If you are plugging this into anything, you are getting this bright yellow texture with pink spots on it. You need to break this down into the individual channels. That's what's great about this texture sample, is that then after that, you can access each one of these channels still as a separate texture. So if you want to do any masks or if you want to do anything to the individual textures, I can still just pull my roughness, do some stuff to it, and then plug it back into my material. You are not hand making these in Photoshop. You can, but there is a way to set this up in Painter that it's going to make this multi-map for you. When you are exporting your textures out, there is a configuration in here that is called Unreal 4 Packed. If you look at this, this is not, you should not use this one. This is not optimized because one, the base color has an alpha. Alphas double the file size of the texture. So if you do not need an alpha texture, you should not be bringing an alpha into Unreal. They do have a multi-map setup and a normal map and also an emissive. I'm not a huge fan of using the default pack texture. You don't want to tweak this because once you change this, it's forever changed. You lose that preset. There is a button up here where you can copy. So if you want to copy one that exists and then play around with it, do that. I would prefer to make my own. I'm going to go through the setup for it real quick. I'm going to click on the plus sign. And let's name this Kelly ACG. Up here are the different types of textures. Grayscale, RGB, R plus G plus B, that's a multi-map. RGB and alpha, R plus G plus B plus alpha. So these are your 5 options. I need a base color and I need a normal map. My base color is RGB. In here, there's one base color. You don't have to worry about having to figure out which one to bring. There's only one. Click and drag it. I want this to be RGB. This is going to take every single base color from all of your materials, and it's going to hook it up here. Naming conventions, T underscore. Now, I could type in pipes underscore B, but then anytime I'm working on something, it's going to be named pipes. And if I'm working on a chair or on a table, I don't want to hard code the name of what I'm working on. This is where your texture set list name comes into play. I usually name this whatever the object is that I'm working on because there is a preset in here or a wildcard or a flag, whatever you want to call it. Let's find my Kelly. And this little $sign right here is going to give you 3 options. You can plug in the project name, which for me, I don't want. The mesh name, which is SM underscore pipes, I don't want that either. I do have the option to pull from my texture set. So if I do T underscore texture set underscore B, because I know this is my base color, no matter what I'm working on, it's always going to plug in what's here. I need a normal map. Normal maps are also RGB. So we'll take the same naming convention, but change it to normal map. There is a bunch of normal maps. There's one here, there's one here, which is the bake, and then there's 2 down here. You want the DirectX normal map. This is the one that has the bake, it has all the materials normal maps, it has the materials height maps, and it has any height that I have painted. The direct X is the one you want. Drag it up, RGB. So now I have a base color exporting, named correctly, and a normal map, named correctly. I need my metal, I need my ambient, and I need my roughness. That is considered a multi-map. Same naming convention, but let's do ambient roughness metal. And this is where we're going to plug in each individual grayscale channel. Red, we're going to do ambient. There's an ambient here, an ambient here. This mixed ambient occlusion is the one we want. Click and drag. It's going to be a gray channel. Next is my R, is roughness. There's only one roughness, and this is pulling all of the roughnesses from my materials that I chose. Drag that up, gray channel. Last is metal. If you don't have metal, you can leave it blank. It's going to default to just a black channel, or you probably will have metal from time to time. You might as well plug it in. And if there is no metal, it'll just be black. So this is the setup that you're going to want for most of your courses. The naming conventions might change slightly. You can always come back in the configuration and make another one or edit. Back in export, I'm going to kick it to my desktop as a Targa. In this configuration, I'm still exporting it with the default. This is where you need to click and find wherever your configuration is. And notice that it automatically named them correctly, and I'll hit export. If we look at these in Photoshop, I have my 3 textures now. So here is my normal map, here is my base color, and here is my ambient, my roughness, and my metal. When you bring these into Unreal, just make sure that when you do bring in that multi-map, you have to manually come over here and turn that off. If you don't, when you use this in your material editor, it's going to give you an error. An ID map is a pre-made mask that you can create in Maya prior to going into Substance Painter. I have a very simple wooden board that has some warping and some bending to it. It's UV'd. Everything is in 0 to 1. My checkers are square. I also have an export board, one that is high res. It has some nails that are slightly lifted out of the wood board and some rounded edges here. This is in one mode. It has enough geometry that it's holding up the structure. I'm going to take this entire high res and export it out. Game res is already ready for me in Painter. Let's bake. Let's do a 1024, and I'm going to bring my high res board in. Bake it out. I'm going to start to see some of the shadows cast for the nails from the high res to game res. When this is done baking, we can also see kind of pixelation. It's not perfect. There's definitely some pixelation there, but I have the illusion that those are there. If I toggle through my bakes, here is my ambient occlusion that's casting those nails down. My curvature, so white pixels are ones that are going to get damaged first. Darker pixels are ones that are going to get damaged less. Positional map, thickness map, normal map, world space, back to my full-on material. So if I am creating wood for this board, let's throw that on there. I'm going to set my UV projection to triplanar so it's flowing the right direction, and maybe reduce some of the height. So we go to the height layer, and I don't want it to be that much. And then let's create some metal for those nails. I'm already really losing where the nails are. It's hard to see with just the wood there. And with the metal, I definitely don't want to see the wood grain on my nails. So this is a situation where I for sure need to take my normal map and make it a normal layer, and my height map and make it a normal layer. Let's set the metal to triplanar and see what we have. I don't really have much to move around on there, maybe just the scale. Let's scale this down so I have more of the actual metal. And then with 3D projection settings, you can also move and offset. So I'm going to try to get more of that metal texture where those nails are. To do this, right mouse clicking, adding a black mask. Now I'm going to have to paint in white where I want those nails to be. Because the nails are circular, it's a little bit easier for me to paint them. If these were more of an organic shape, it would be really hard for me to get this mask lined up exactly where I would want the metal for that nail to be. This is where ID maps come in. ID maps, again, are a mask that you can pre-make in Maya. Now, I can't even use this polygon fill tool because that nail doesn't actually exist on my game res. I can't use the UV shell because there's no UV shell either. So having this set up as a polygon fill is not going to help me. Creating ID maps is based off of something that's called vert color. In Maya, there is a way that you can flood fill your vertices with RGB or alpha. That color gets stored, and then when you bake an ID map in Painter, it sees that color is stored and it makes a mask for you. My high res has the nails. So let's grab these two nails over here. Under Mesh Display, Apply Color. I'm going to reset my settings. And let's flood fill these red. I usually just use the swatches that are already up here. It doesn't matter what color you pick. If I was doing this for real, I would flood fill all of the nails the same color. Anytime you have a change in material, you can use this ID map. For example purposes, let's make this one yellow, and then let's make these two blue. So what I have is a board, which I'm going to leave the board alone. I don't need a color for that. But I'm creating these colored masks on all of the nails. I can do a mesh combine. It sticks. All those colors stick within each individual vertice. And let's re-export this. Board, high res. I'm also going to put an ID after it because this is the one I know has all of the coloring to it. In here, I've already baked my normal map and my world space and my ambient, so I don't need to rebake any of that stuff. I really just want to bake the ID map. So in baking mesh maps, I'm going to check everything off except for the ID map. I'm going to get rid of my high res that was in there and load in the ID map. I will now finally have an ID map with information in it. And that ID map looks like this. Anywhere where the UVs were, for wherever the high-res nails were, it is going to correspond and bake down onto my game res. So I have two little blue spots, a yellow spot, and two red spots. If I hit B to toggle through, here's my ID. Here's my ambient, curvature, just has that extra texture in it. With this metal, if I right mouse click, I don't want to make a black mask anymore. I'm going to make a mask with color selection. This is automatically going to plug my ID map in, and now I can just, with an eyedropper, pick, I want the blue to be masked. It is automatically going to take those colored pixels and know that I want to mask that so that now I'm seeing metal in that spot. I'm going to pick again, and let's pick yellow. I can pick again, and let's pick the red. So without me having to paint anything, it put my mask in the exact spots where those nails were because I flood filled them in Maya. This helped for my texture. It's not really helping too much for my height. It doesn't look like those are sticking up. And if I zoom into this, it doesn't look great. If I toggle through my bakes again, when I baked this ID map, I baked it at a 1024. 1024 is a pretty large resolution texture, but it's not enough for me to get a smooth line around here. If I bake my ID map at 512, I'm going to have an even blurrier texture. That is what I'm using for my mask. I'm going to bake this one more time, but I'm going to go way up to a 4K with this. I don't care how dense this ID map is. I'm not bringing it into Unreal. I'm just using it for a mask in here. And with it baked that high, oops, I didn't mean to cancel it. Let me bake it one more time. It's going to be a lot smoother around those edges, which means my mask is going to be a lot smoother. Another thing I would suggest doing when you're baking ID maps is to also turn on some anti-aliasing. If I set this to 2x2, it's not only going to bake a 4K ID map, it's also going to blur out the edges of this so that when I am using it as a mask, I have the option to start adjusting some tolerance. So if my tolerance is at 0, I am just using the pixels from that ID map. If my tolerance is at 1, I'm using all of that anti-aliasing until I'm all the way up to it just flood-filled the whole thing in. So you have some options. You also have this hardness option where you can add and remove some of the pixels while you are dealing with tolerance. So you have more control over this ID map when you bake it separately and bake it as a higher resolution texture. So I'm going to drop this down. Actually, I'm going to bring this up just a little bit more and maybe reduce the tolerance a bit. So that base color looks a lot better. I'm not really seeing a lot of height, even though there is height. I mean, there's a normal map there that bakes from the high res to game res, but it's just not enough. I'm going to make a hand-painted layer and name it height. And we'll find a brush, and I am going to turn everything off except for height and go all the way up with this and just really sloppily paint some height. Now, obviously, that's not close to where the nails are, but I don't really care because I can make a mask that only puts that height where the nails are. Right mouse click, add a mask with color selection. So by default, it's a black mask, which just got rid of all of the height that I painted in this layer. But if I click on this yellow, it is going to put that height, even though I painted it pretty sloppy, it's only putting that height right where that nail is based off of my ID map. I can also click on this, and the height is going to match for those. So not only do I have that, I also have the color, and this looks a lot better than what it looked like with just my high-res to game-res bake. If you have things on your high-res model that do not exist physically on your game-res model, this is a great usage for ID maps.